Of all of those homes that have been added to the city since Census Day of 2020. And you can see that using those numbers, we have estimated that an additional 2,261 people have been added to the city, the majority of which have been located in District 1. Specifically, a little over 1,400 people have been added to District 1 since Census Day. So, when we factor that in, we come up with this estimate where 39,865 is our estimate for the city as of this year. If you divide that by 4, you get an average for each district, just under 10,000 people each, specifically 9,966 people for each district. So what that means is, when we're done with this process, ideally, each district should have exactly that number. It's not going to be exactly that number, but something close to that. So just under 10,000 people for each district. Good. Using that data, we can see that at the moment, as the districts are currently drawn, District 1 is by far the largest district. It has 17,261 people. That's 7,295 more people than it would be expected if it had an average population, or another way of saying this is it's 73.2% above average. Conversely, the smallest district is District 4 at just 4,579 people. That's 5,387 fewer people than the average, or 54.1% fewer than that average. So what this means is that after you account for the growth that's occurred since Census Day of 2020, your population imbalance, which was already large on Census Day, has gotten even more extreme. The mean deviation is 40.8%. The spread is 127.3%. Now, the spread number is the difference between the largest district and the smallest district. You add those two numbers together, and you get 127.3%. Again, ideally, both of these numbers should be below that 8% threshold that's called for in the city charter. So these numbers are way above that. And so the end result is that we need to engage in redistricting, as we discussed when we came to the city after we finished the first part of the project. Good. Not only does the city need to engage in redistricting, but specifically, the overall pattern of district boundary changes will need to increase the population of District 2 and specifically District 4, while also significantly reducing that of District 1. All of these changes, adjusting the population of each district, is going to require large geographic changes to the district boundaries. And of course, we recognize that anytime change is mentioned in any context, but especially when it comes to electoral districts, people are naturally uncomfortable. And we would remind you that the reason that changes are so large in this case is because, again, it's been more than 40 years since the last time the city engaged in this process. And so this time around, it's going to feel a little bit more extreme than is normal. Hopefully, moving forward, redistricting will become a more regular occurrence, and the changes won't feel so gargantuan. So we have created 3 map alternatives for the council to consider, and we've created them using these following parameters. These are the parameters that always guide our redistricting process. The first of which is reasonable population equality across districts, or population equity. As the charter suggests, we need to make sure that the deviation is below 8% in terms of deviation. But also, we strictly adhere to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which states that arbitrary dilution of minority population clusters and other discriminatory practices are strictly prohibited. Our second goal is geographic contiguity and appropriate compactness. So we will always seek spatially compact districts. We will always seek to follow, where we can, major natural and man-made boundaries. That makes the districts more recognizable to the public and to the elected members themselves. We will maintain respect for the integrity of communities of interest. And we will minimize the degree of change in pre-existing patterns of districts to the extent possible. That said, population equity is always of primary importance, and the others are significant in guiding our decisions towards reasonable population balance. There's one other factor at play that we have to account for, and that is a brand new state law, specifically House Bill number 411, which states a number of important points. The first is that districts may not be drawn with the intent to favor or disfavor a candidate for or a member of the governing body based upon their residential address. That each municipality shall create districts as nearly as equal in proportion to the respective populations as possible. And that such changes may not be made in the 270 days prior to the general election for the governing body of the municipality. Now, given that the city's next election is on March 11th of 2025, that means that any changes that the city adopts must be done before June 14th of this year. So the timeline is tight. Okay, with that preamble over, here we can actually get into the meat of tonight's discussion, which is discussing the alternatives that we've created for the council's consideration. Here we see the map for alternative 1. And this is what we call our minimalist option. We always start redistricting by trying to change the boundaries as little as we possibly can while achieving population equity, okay? And that's exactly what alternative 1 does. Remember, what is the goal? We've got a couple of goals we're trying to attain. The first is that District 4 has to grow. It has to get bigger. And there's only one way it can do that. It can go north, can go east, can go south. It has to go west. And so you see that it do so here. It's going west across the Intracoastal as far as Barack Obama Highway. And also, we see District 1, it shrinks, its eastern boundary also shrinks to the west, right? Remember, District 1 is way too large, it has to get much smaller, okay? So this next map shows you the exact changes, hopefully, there we go, the exact changes that have been made from the existing districts. This map shows those changes with red hatching, and you can see that there's 4 general areas of change on this map, and I'm going to go through each one of these one at a time. So here's the first change. District 4 is expanding west across the Intracoastal to President Barack Obama Highway, north of Blue Heron Boulevard. This is 2 changes, actually. It's adding 4,140 people to District 4 from District 2, and then another 959 people from District 1. Then, as I alluded to before, District 1 contracts west to the easterly boundary of the Sea Breeze Harbor, also known as the Wedgwood Plaza subdivision. This reduces its population by 6,241 people, and this area and its residents are absorbed by District 2. Finally, we have District 3 contracting south to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, east of the Acre Home Park, Federal Gardens, and Harmony Heights subdivisions. This area and its 896 residents are also absorbed by District 2. Good. So, under this alternative, the population equity is much improved. The mean deviation falls from 40.8% to just 1.8%. The spread falls from 127.3%, an extremely large number, to just 5.5%. Okay? And again, that's our minimalist option. Also, as a reminder, what is the spread? The difference between the largest district and the smallest district. That's how we get to that spread number, in case there's any confusion as to that, as what that is. Good. Here we see our second alternative, alternative map 2. And alternative map 2 is very similar to alternative 1. It's a variant of alternative 1. We've been a little bit more aggressive in the changes we've made. Remember, alternative one is supposed to make the least amount of changes possible. Here we've made a little bit more change. And the reason we've done that is in search of additional population equity. Again, I can show you here a change map with the changes from the existing districts highlighted in red. And so there's one change that's different from that of alternative one, and that is that we've added a southerly expansion of District 4 along the eastern side of Broadway. Overall, this move adds 4,506 people to District 4. The other adjustments in this map are exactly as we described for the previous alternative. So I said that this move would increase the population equity of the map, and it does. You can see here that the mean deviation falls to just 0.9%, and the spread falls to just 2.1%, right? All of these values are the best in terms of population equity for the three alternatives that we're presenting this evening and I have presented to the council for their consideration. Finally, we have our third alternative, and this is the alternative with the most change. It's the most radical, if you like, of the alternatives that we presented. And it was created in part in response to feedback that we got at a setting just like this, at a public forum setting that we had a few weeks back. How long ago was that? Was that a month ago? About a month ago. At least a month. Yeah. So you can see in this map that the districts are broken up into a series of north-south running districts. And here we see the change map with all the changes from the existing districts highlighted in red. And you can see there's a lot more red on this map. Good. So I'll go through each of these changes in turn. District 1 retains the northwest corner of the city, west of the center line of the C-17 canal. Its eastern border then continues south of Blue Heron Boulevard along the C-17 canal as far as the Marsh Harbor subdivision. It then jogs east of Congress and then south of the city limits. This means that District 1 becomes the city's western district, absorbing 4,739 people from District 3. District 3, meanwhile, retains the area south of Blue Heron Boulevard, west of Australian Avenue. It gains that part of the city that's north of Blue Heron Boulevard, east of the 17, and west of R.J. Henley Avenue. Note that this change does mean that the Acre Home Park subdivision, as you can see on this map here, is split between Districts 2 and 3. 6,623 people are moved from District 1 to District 2 under this particular alteration. And then we have District 2. District 2 is composed of two parts, specifically that part of the city that's north of Blue Heron Boulevard, between R.J. Henley Avenue and President Barack Obama Highway. There's 4,333 people being moved under this shift. And the areas south of Blue Heron Boulevard between Australian Avenue and Broadway. This change involves a shift of 2,506 people from District 3 to District 2. Okay. The last district, of course, is District 4, and District 4, the adjustments for that district are exactly as we described in the previous alternative 2. So, under this alternative, population equity is again improved. The mean deviation falls to just 2%, and the spread falls to 6.2%. So to summarize, we see a table here that shows the population equity statistics associated with each of the three alternatives. Alternative 1 makes the minimal geographic adjustments necessary to the existing boundaries to achieve reasonable population equity. Alternative 2 is the most balanced of the three alternatives that we've presented to the council for consideration. And Alternative 3 draws the district boundaries in a primarily north-south oriented direction. Just for a quick review, here again, we see, let's see, come on, you can do it. There we go. Oh, now it's going too fast. There we go. There's the map for Alternative 1. And there's the map for Alternative 2. And there's the map for alternative 3. Very good. And with that, we'd be very happy to answer any questions that you all have. Sure.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Bill Contole. I've lived in Riviera Beach for over 40 years. I'm looking at the city charter here, and correct me if I'm wrong, the city charter is the standard by which we have to address this issue, correct? We have to follow what the city charter says in terms of what we'll consider when we redistrict.
So that's one of the factors.
Well, let me read it. Oh, we only have one microphone. Okay, my question is this. The city charter says we do population. We are supposed to count population. My question is, number one, you did not count population. You used the census. So, for example, if these people in this house next door chose not to complete the census, they would not be included in your figures, correct? Okay, and then I'm asking you, how would you include the people that are not residents permanently and live here, which by definition, population is, according to the dictionary, population is inhabitants of a particular town, the total number of people inhabiting. You did not count the total people inhabiting, did you?
Let me try to speak to that. The census counts people. The census has rules and regulations, and it has a follow-up procedure for people who choose not to voluntarily respond. They have months after the census day of time that they use to straighten out any issues like you're just saying. If I chose not to respond to the census, I will be contacted numerous times. Ultimately, if they wish, they can send somebody to your door, which they do. They have a whole budget for dealing with that and a whole time period after April 1 in which they clarify those difficult situations. The census counts people at their usual place of residence. That's the question that you're asked if you look at the census form. You choose where your usual place of residence is. For most people, that's their house. For some people, okay, they may have more than one house. Or some people may be migratory, traveling. Okay, the census asks them to make a decision. You're either in place A as your usual residence, or you're in place B as your usual residence. You can only be in one. So if you're a snowbird, if I can use a popular phrase, if you're a snowbird and you live in Riviera Beach during December and January and February, whatever, but you have a home also elsewhere, up north we like to say, right? Then you choose whether Riviera Beach is your usual place of residence or whether your home up north, okay, is your usual place of residence. You only get counted once, the law of the land, okay? So those are the people that are residents of Riviera Beach. We've added slightly to that. You saw the numbers, 2,600 or so, because the number of housing units that the census had has increased because of certificates of occupancy, which is a legal requirement in order to, in order to move into a housing unit. And Riviera Beach added that many housing units between April 1 of 2000 and March of 2024. And that data comes from city records, okay, very official records. So a resident is somebody who declares their, okay, Riviera Beach location, their home, okay, whether it's a condo, an apartment, a rental, doesn't matter. They declare that place as their usual place of residence, and they become a member of the resident population of Riviera Beach, a member of the resident population of Palm Beach County, a member of the resident population of the state of Florida, and a member, obviously, of the population of the United States. That's what we showed at the beginning, public law, okay? That is the requirement of data. There is no other data set that's readily available for counting people at whatever geographic level you wish to work, other than what we call the decennial census, which by constitutional decree for this country is taken every 10 years, okay? Now, of course, a city or any legal organization can choose to do their own count. Let me tell you how many dollars that might count. Much more than you want to spend, because guess who's going to pay for it? Okay, the citizens of the unit, okay, the resident taxpayers of the unit, okay, which may not be a resident legally. They may be a snowbird, but they still own property in Riviera Beach. So it's confusing, I know, for some people, but it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen of the United States. It doesn't matter whether, okay, you're 1 day old or 100 years old. If you're present, okay, on April 1st, 2020, 2010, 2000, 1990, whatever year you want to go back to, if you're present in Riviera Beach, you have the option of declaring it as your, of course, a 1-year-old's not going to do that. Their parents will. But you're going to have the option of declaring whether or not you're, okay, you and your immediate family, okay, are, okay, residents, your usual place of domicile. So I hope I've overtalked that.
I don't mean to be impertinent, but all I can tell you is that I am reading the city charter, and the city charter says population, and you've confaggled that with census. You have not counted the population of this city. And I am certain that there are many people in this city all around us that have not been counted by the census, because the census misses people. And I don't care about the cost of it. I care about equality. I care about and one more thing, sir. You talk about things. I take it you're not a lawyer, are you? And do you think there's a legal difference between population and citizenship?
The terminology population is very general.
The population, the definition of population is people who inhabit a community. That is the legal definition, not the census, not these other things. And I'll give you the mic back, and you can say what you want, but the city charter says what it is, and by not following the city charter, you are disenfranchising the people that have not been counted on the census.
I understand your point, okay, and you make an argument, okay. What you're challenging, okay, is U.S. law of where you are counted in this country. You're challenging it. You're perfectly welcome to challenge it. Okay, all right, okay, and you can take it before a judge and see how it turns out. Okay, the bottom line is,
that's how this city ends up losing money. It's not about doing the right thing. If the right thing is done, we won't be in a lawsuit. If you go ahead and don't count the population and you don't consider that, then you're going to really pay in a lawsuit, and that's the most expensive way.
So let me try to kind of frame this particular discussion, right? The intent behind this is for it to be a fruitful discussion for the purposes of answering questions that persons may have with regards to redistricting. This is an exercise that should have been completed 40 years ago, and we are seeing why the challenge has been that it hasn't been done for 40 years, because it is something that invariably is changing. One of the things that I want to make abundantly clear to all the residents, it does not impact who you are as voters. What it does is you as voters will still have the opportunity to elect every person that sits on that city council, all seats, because they all run at large. So it does not impact you as the voters. What it does do is it expands the opportunities for those that reside in the community to run for elected office. And what it does also ensure by the districts, when you look at the maps, it does show that just in a community that you didn't have, let's say you didn't have districts, and why this is codified in the charter is because if you didn't have districts, it's really for the purposes of residency to ensure that you have fair and equitable representation throughout the city, that you don't have a particular congregation of members that live or elected officials that live in one respective community. So it makes sure that your representation is throughout the city. So all the elected officials run at large. Your vote on Singer Island counts as much as your vote in Lone Pine for all the elected officials. So what is being discussed here is that we can see clearly that districts are bigger and smaller based on the information that is provided. And so we are required by charter to go through this particular process for the purposes of redistricting. And in the event that we do not proceed forward with redistricting, we then fall in violation of multiple laws, whether it's our own charter, whether it's state law, whether it's federal law. One of the things that was provided for, and I do want to go back to that point because I really think it's a very relevant point, is the Voting Rights Act. What if we were to create or utilize data from other data sets and data sources, whether we decided to count the number of units in a particular condo building or do a hand count or what have you, what is the challenge as a result of that, and how does that play into it? And I think that's important because that's really the basis for the process that we have to go through.
Yes, it's an excellent point. So when you engage in redistricting, as we said, we cannot violate the Voting Rights Act. And we talked about how you need to make sure that there's no arbitrary dilution of our minority population. How can you assess whether you're arbitrarily diluting a minority population unless you are able to take into account the demographics of a city? Simply multiplying the units that live in a particular area is not going to give you the demographics of the city. You require a census of the municipality in question, or the area of government in question, in this case, the city of Riviera Beach. So if you require a census, you've got two choices. You can either rely on the US Census, or you can perform your own census, as Dr. Schultz correctly pointed out. The standard for governmental agencies across the land is using the US Census. If these districts or one of these maps are adopted and someone cares to challenge it in court, we have to be able to go to court and say we use a defendable methodology. Using the US Census is a very defendable methodology. Creating your own census is not only expensive, but it's going to open you up to a bunch of questions as to, was your census accurate? What was your methodology? Did you miss somebody? So, yeah, it's the standard procedure for redistricting all across the country is using census data.
You start with the census base. If you're doing the redistricting right at the time the census comes out, you use the census data. If you do it years later, like now, 4 years afterward, 5 years afterward, 6 years afterward, typically you would be expected to do some kind of adjustment to the census data to take into account what's happened. When I started districting and redistricting back in the 80s in Broward and Palm Beach counties, there was a lot of annexations going on. And so you would use the census to do the estimates, make your presentation, the council or commission would vote on it, and 3 years later, they would have added a huge section of land, to the city. City expanded, and a lot of new housing was being developed, not only on the new land that was being annexed, but also in existing vacant land in the city. So they would have to do a population estimate because the census wasn't going to be taken again for another 3, 4, 5 years. So population estimation is part of the process, and it really is a function of how far from the census are you, and in reality, how much change has there really been in that particular municipality. Annexations are obvious, okay? Major developments, big condominium complexes, which came into Florida in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in heavy duty, okay? Those had to be taken into account at that stage. But the census data is the most rational data. It's codified in several laws, okay? The state looks at it. If the state looks at your districts with respect to the new ordinance or the new bill that they passed, okay, they're going to look at census data. And they may look at the population estimates that have been added, but they're definitely going to look at the census data to see whether or not your districts are balanced, as we call it, equity across the districts. And as Mr. Evans was saying, in this particular city, you vote for everybody, no matter where you live. If you're in District 3, you vote for the same number of commissioners, okay, council members, excuse me, as if you're in District 4 or District 1 or whatever. So there's, from a voting point of view, there's no difference into who you can select to be on the council. What there is that the persons who run for the council have to come from 4 different parts of the city. It's kind of a spreading them out. One of the cities I did ages ago, 5 commissioners, they were called, 3 of them lived in the same condominium complex. You can imagine what the people who didn't live in that condominium complex might have thought about representation. They felt they weren't being represented, and that was the reason I was brought in to help sort all that out. And it was, it was a process. We went through it, and we got it resolved. But that's the kind of thing you're trying to avoid when you set up lines. When you set up districts, you're trying to spread out across the different communities in your city so that representation is not concentrated. It's spread out and hopefully represents the varied communities, okay, that exist, in this case, in Riviera Beach. Okay.
One of the questions that we got online was that, the West Side needed more representation. And I do want to address that question, is that you have 6 elected officials that are at large. The districts that the elected officials reside is just for the purposes of ensuring that there is a individual that resides in that respective district that sits on that particular board. So any elected official from any district would be more than glad to take your phone call and address your particular issue. The district is really for residency. And when you look at the districts as well, and how I talked about it, is if you have a district, for instance, District 1, I believe, has 17,000 people in District 1, where District 4 has 5,000. So realistically, if somebody is going to run for office in District 1, it's 1 out of 17,000 persons, versus in District 4, it's 1 out of 5,000. So what will happen is, with the changes of the district, the numbers would be close to 10,000 to ensure and provide greater opportunities for those that may want to run for those seats at purpose. But as it relates to the relationship with the voter when they go to the ballot box for selecting who will represent them, you vote for all the seats and all the elected officials. You're not voting for one specific person in one specific district. We do not have single member districts. We're not like the school board or the county where you only vote for those people that represent your respective district. It's profoundly different, and it is very common in local municipalities that this is the standard. You vote for all the elected officials. The districts, the district is to make sure that there is representation from all over the community that sit collectively on the board for the purposes of representing the interests of the city. But your issues can be heard by any particular council person, and have been heard by any particular council person, to advocate for your elected, for whatever your issue may be. Any other questions? Any additional comments? Yeah, sure.
I'll get him the mic.
All right.
I've talked enough.
You're also in the district supposed to address commonality of interests. And I ask you, is the commonality of interests in these districts that you propose the same for to different areas? In other words, are they have common interest? How did you address that? And what did you ensure that that would stay that way?
Sure. So when we build districts out of neighborhoods. And we strive never to break up a neighborhood. There was a case here with the 3rd district where one of the neighborhoods was being broken up. We were very specific about pointing that out. Subdivisions, neighborhoods, serve as the basic building blocks of these districts. What that does not mean is that every district should be composed of a single type of person. For example, as much as I might like it, there's no way that I can make a district of just Miami Dolphin fans. Unfortunately, some districts are going to have Buffalo Bill fans, like this man over here, and some New York Jets fans, right? And unfortunately, even if we have communities of only Dolphins fans and only Jets fans and only Bills fans, there's just not going to be enough of fans of one team to make a single district out of those people. So we don't break up neighborhoods, but we do have to aggregate those neighborhoods together to get to that magic 10,000 number, even if it means that you have to join some Bills fans into your district, which we don't want to do, but sometimes you have to.
Any other questions?
Just a quick question to follow up on the previous question. When you looked at option number 3, and I know that's the one where you said the Park Manor neighborhood is split. What is it?
I think it was Park Acre Homes,
Park Acre. Were you able to get them in one district as a neighborhood without one or the other, without disrupting the overall balance of the districts, to have at least that community in the one district?
Right. Thank you. That's a very good question. So the only alternative where Park Acre Homes is split between two districts is alternative 3. The other 2 alternatives, that's not the case. That said, you can see that as we described in our redistricting parameters, we've tried to use as much as possible the major thoroughfares as the boundaries for your existing districts, right? One of the reasons for that is that it makes for nice compact boundaries, right? So that was one of our goals, is always to create a compact boundary. Another reason for that is that it makes the districts very recognizable. You don't have to say, my district is made up of a third of this community and a fourth of that community and a fifth of that community, that little local road over here, and then it jogs up there. You can say, no, my community is defined, or my district rather, is defined by President Barack Obama Highway and Blue Heron Boulevard, and then the city limits to the north. That's easy and recognizable for both the community, for the residents of the city, and the elected officials. That said, there are some communities that cross major thoroughfares. So it's probably going to be impossible to create any district boundaries where no community is split up. We try to avoid it, but sometimes you have no choice.
One question that I have that I'll also like for you all to do. So obviously, this is change, right? And so what is the basis or items that if somebody has an issue with regards to these maps, what is the basis to effectively try to change what has been offered as options here for consideration? What are the mechanisms that one would have to be able to demonstrate for the purposes of the analysis to make it statistically valid for the purposes of moving a district boundary or modifying the maps as proposed?
Very good. Thank you very much. Excellent question. So we've spoken about going, I hope it doesn't come to this case, but if we were able to call in front of a court to justify actions, it's very important that we can talk to our rationale as to why we made decision X or decision Y. And we would normally say, we made this decision because we're seeking increased population equity, or we were increasing a more compact district, or we were trying to improve the spatial contiguity of this area. So that's our logic. So if someone was to ask me, can you do X? The first question I have to have in my mind, so that I can be comfortable if I'm called up as a witness in front of a court, is what's the rationale for that move? Why are you proposing this move? And that's why we get very uncomfortable when elected officials, with all due respect, suggest changes. Because even, in all likelihood, those changes are suggested with good intent. But the moment that such a change is suggested, it enters a question into our minds and the minds of anybody who's watching us make those maps. If we were called into court and said, why did you do that? I say, oh, because Commissioner X told me to do so. How is that a good thing? We can't justify that. We lose all credibility. In fact, the reason that we were hired for our independence. We were hired to put a layer of insulation between the city and particularly the city staff, right? The city staff does not want to be in the position where they've got supervisors leaning over their shoulders and saying, draw the line here, draw the line there. No, so you go outside of the city, you hire an independent consultant who comes in, who's had decades of experience in Dr. Schultz's case, to apply standard methodology to redistricting, okay? And then if we're asked to make a change, we have to say, hold up, don't redistrict from the dais. What is it? What is your goal? Don't tell me, with all due respect, don't tell me to draw a boundary around this particular neighborhood. Instead, to answer your initial question, is what is the goal here? What is it that when we haven't done that you would like to see done, right? Is there a historic community that was always associated with this district that you would like to see remain part of that district? That would be a legitimate goal, maintaining the integrity of existing communities. If that was suggested to us in that manner, that would be perfectly appropriate, okay? But the moment someone suggests, no, move the line up a block, move the line over 2 blocks, that would be typically inappropriate because we can't defend it if we go to court.
The new state law, which just was passed and was implemented this July, specifically states, we highlighted it on here, it specifically states that you can't serve the self-interest of any individual commissioner or council member in your case. If you do, the ordinance, the resolution, however you pass your new districts, are void. That's in the state law. So dealing with residency of commissioners, whether they're existing or council members that are currently on the board, or somebody who's sitting in the audience who's planning to run, for council, and they want to see the borders a little different than the alternatives suggest, that's illegal. Now, it hasn't gone to court yet because it's just a new, bill, so I can't speak as a lawyer about what's going to happen. Okay?
Thank you for the presentation. Joseph Anderson, President of the Park Manor Neighborhood Association, and I see that our neighborhood association will be split between District 4 as well as District 2. I understand there's no panacea and, to appease or placate each sides and whatnot. I guess my first question was that taken in consideration that Park Manor Neighborhood Association has to be split between the two? And my follow-up question is, if I know this is an aggressive timeline, being June as being one of your dates that you have to hit, if this doesn't come into fruition past that particular date, what is the pros, cons, legality, and has this been considered doing this on an off election year, which is 2026?
So I'll answer the question with regards to the timeline. So our intent is, and we have already noticed that the second and final reading of this particular ordinance is set for June 5th. If the ordinance is adopted, then it would go into effect for the election that's coming up in 2025. In the event that the ordinance is not passed or there's some other action that occurs or what have you, it would be my recommendation that we would look to bring this back in subsequent next year, to be able to, every year we would try to bring the item back from the purposes of, we know right now, based on the information provided, that there's an inequity in the system. And if we do not address the inequity in the system, we're in violation of multiple laws and rules that are in place. And so as an agency, we would look to bring that item forward. So I'm going to turn it over to the team to talk about the neighborhood and how that came up to what the numbers consist for Park Manor.
Yeah, so if you look at the map here, and you, as you know well, you live there, it's Park Manor North, which is north of Blue Heron, and Park Manor South, which is south of Blue Heron. The city maps it as two separate resident communities, but if you want to treat it as a whole, that's fine. You know better than I. Regardless, there would be no way to keep both sides of this community into a single district, because you're on the border, and at some point, once you get on the border, you're really at that cusp of 10,000 people in this case, right? So if we were to add Park Manor South in, into District 4, that would push District 4 way over the average. And if you leave Park Manor out, it would have it way below. So as I suggested, we strive to try to keep communities whole, but we also strive to use major thoroughfares. The fact that Park Manor is on either side of the major thoroughfare increases the likelihood that it's going to end up in two different districts. But that said, if we come back in 10 years, if we're lucky enough to be asked to come back in 10 years, or another consultant comes back in 10 years, you might see that get conglomerated into a single district again.
Population equity, no matter how you want to define population, okay, is the overriding rule. Compactness, spatial contiguity is also very important, but compactness falls second to population equity. So you have to have population balance by multiple layers of rules and laws, federal, state, et cetera, okay? And your own city charter. So how many, if you don't achieve population equity, you're opening yourself up to lots of fun times.
All right. Any other questions from the floor? All right. Any questions online? Our one-man band, right?
Okay. He's doing a good job.
All right. Again, I want to thank you, everybody, for coming out. We do have another session that's scheduled on the 28th of this month. That will be at the Clean and Safe Ambassador Center on Singer Island. And so we're asking folks to come out. We will be doing the same type of format that will be in person as well as virtual options. And one of the things I will encourage people to do is please visit our website. Look for our redistricting page. It's on our city clerk's website. It has all the presentations. It has the maps. It has information of the establishing ordinances. It talks about redistricting, but more importantly, it has a comment box where you can put in all your questions, all your concerns, all your issues. And I can tell you, anytime I get those questions or concerns, I send it over to our consultants so they can be able to look at the information that's provided and either revamp their presentations or address those particular situations when the community has questions. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that the folks in the community are comfortable with the information that's provided, that the information is accurate, and that your government is responsive. This is something that is very important, and we want to make sure that everyone has fair and equitable access to government. And so that's why this is so important for us to move forward with this particular endeavor. So I thank you, everybody, for finding it appropriate to be here with us this evening, and then obviously joining us on the 28th. And then this item comes back before the board for second and final reading, where the board will have additional conversations and discussions and ultimately have to make a decision on the three maps that are provided. The board adopted these three maps to move forward for public discussion. So if you do have some additional questions or you want to increase the map for the purposes of looking how and where this will impact you in your particular neighborhood, please don't hesitate to visit our website. And we certainly thank everyone for being here this evening. So thank you, and thank you to our presenters. And we have the final decision will be June 5th, Wednesday, June 5th, City Council meeting at the Ambassador, or not the Ambassador Center, at the Marina, Riviera Beach Marina at 6 o'clock. We will be, that's where the board will actually have to make a decision on the matter that's going to be before them. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you for those that are joining online. And certainly we're going to have this video in circulation, and then we'll address any questions that persons have through the week. But have a happy and safe Memorial Day weekend. And thank you, everyone, for being here this evening with us.